Have you ever stood in a room full of people who were supposed to love you most, only to realize you were completely invisible to them? Have you ever watched your own parents introduce every single person at a gathering except you, as if you didn't exist? As if your years of sacrifice meant absolutely nothing? Because that's exactly what happened to me at my parents' 25th wedding anniversary party, and what came next changed everything. My name is Dr. Maya Chen, and from wherever you're watching this, I need you to stay with me through this story. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The country club ballroom was decorated in soft gold and ivory, exactly the way my mother had dreamed about for months. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over round tables draped in expensive linens, and a professional photographer moved through the crowd, capturing every smile, every embrace, every moment. That would become a treasured memory. I watched from the corner near the dessert table, wearing the navy blue dress I'd bought specifically for this occasion, the one that cost me a week's worth of grocery money during my residency, because I wanted to look perfect for their special night. I had arrived early to help with the final preparations, just like I always did. I arranged the flower centerpieces, made sure the caterers had everything they needed, and even fixed the sound system when it started cutting out during the test run. My parents were busy greeting guests, accepting congratulations, and posing for photos with everyone who mattered to them. And as the evening progressed, I realized with growing clarity that I wasn't on that list. For 3 hours, I watched my father, Robert, guide person after person around the room with his arm around their shoulders, introducing them to colleagues, neighbors, and family friends. This is my neighbor Joe, the one I told you about who helped me fix the fence. This is Linda's sister Sarah. She just got back from her trip to Italy. This is my golf buddy Mike. We've been playing together for 15 years. Even Tyler, my 25-year-old brother who still lived in their basement and had gone through 4 different business ventures in the past 2 years, got his moment. This is my son Tyler. He's working on something really innovative in the tech space. But when people asked about me, when they said things like, "Oh, and who is this lovely young woman?" my parents would smile politely and change the subject, or simply walk away to greet someone else. Not once did I hear the words, "This is our daughter Maya," or "Maya is a doctor at Cleveland Clinic," or even just, "This is Maya." I might as well have been part of the catering staff for all the acknowledgement I received. The irony wasn't lost on me. This party, this beautiful celebration of their love and partnership, was being held at the Westlake Country Club because I had quietly paid the membership dues for the past 3 years. The elegant dress my mother wore, the one she'd been admiring in the boutique window for months, was hanging in her closet because I had surprised her with it for Christmas, putting it on my credit card even though I was surviving on hospital, cafeteria food, and student loan money. The professional photographer capturing all these precious moments was there because I had hired him as their anniversary gift, using money I should have spent on updating my own interview suits for fellowship applications. But none of that mattered tonight. Tonight, I was invisible. I had been invisible for a very long time, actually. Through 4 years of undergraduate studies where I graduated summa cum laude while working 3 part-time jobs to help with Tyler's college expenses. Through 4 years of medical school where I studied 18-hour days and still found time to edit Tyler's resume and cover letters when he was job hunting. Through 3 years of residency, where I worked 100-hour weeks and still managed to send money home every month to help with the mortgage payments when my father's company downsized and his hours were cut. The invisibility had become so normal that I had stopped expecting anything different. When I matched into my dream fellowship program at Massachusetts General Hospital, the congratulations call lasted exactly 3 minutes before the conversation shifted to Tyler's latest startup idea and whether I thought he had potential to make it big. When I published my first research paper in a prestigious medical journal, my mother's response was to ask if I could look at Tyler's business plan and give him some feedback on the financial projections. Even my apartment in downtown Cleveland, the tiny one-bedroom place that I loved because it was finally mine after years of shared hospital housing, had become an extension of their expectations. My parents had keys, of course, because what if there's an emergency? Tyler had keys too, because he's your brother and family helps family. Which meant that at least twice a month, I would come home from a 36-hour shift to find Tyler camped out on my couch, eating my food, using my Wi-Fi, and leaving his laundry in my washing machine because his latest business venture wasn't quite generating enough income to cover his own place. The country club party was supposed to be different. This was their night, their celebration, their moment to shine. I had planned to simply be a proud daughter, supporting them from the background, enjoying the music and the dancing and the joy of seeing them happy together. I had even practiced small talk in the mirror, preparing for the moment when they would introduce me to their friends and colleagues, when I would finally get to be part of their world instead of just funding it from the shadows. But as I stood there watching my father regale a group of his co-workers with stories about Tyler's entrepreneurial spirit and innovative thinking, I felt something shift inside my chest. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was more like a door closing, or maybe opening. A quiet recognition that this moment, this complete erasure of my existence at their celebration, was not an accident or an oversight. It was a choice. They chose to hide me because acknowledging me would mean acknowledging what I represented. I was the evidence of their failures, their financial struggles, their inability to provide for their family without leaning on their daughter's academic achievements and future earning potential. I was the reminder that their comfortable suburban lifestyle was built on the foundation of my medical school loans and my resident salary and my quiet, uncomplaining support. I was inconvenient to the narrative they wanted to tell about their success and happiness. So they introduced everyone except me. They posed for photos with everyone except me. They made toasts about everyone who had contributed to their wonderful life together, except me. I was taking a sip of champagne and wondering if I should just leave quietly when I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Dr. Chen, what a pleasant surprise to see you here." I turned around to find Mr. Harrison, the senior vice president of my father's manufacturing company, approaching with a warm smile. He was a distinguished man in his 60s who I had met once before at a hospital charity event where I had been volunteering. He was also on the board of directors for the Cleveland Clinic Foundation, which was how he knew about my work. "Mr. Harrison, how nice to see you again," I replied, grateful that at least someone at this party knew who I was. "I was just telling my wife about that groundbreaking research you published on cardiac rehabilitation protocols," he continued, gesturing to an elegant woman standing beside him. "Margaret, this is Dr. Maya Chen, the brilliant young cardiologist I was telling you about. She's doing revolutionary work in post-surgical recovery techniques." I felt the blood drain from my face as I noticed my parents, who had been standing just a few feet away, suddenly freeze in their conversation. My father's head snapped around so fast I thought he might get whiplash. My mother's champagne glass stopped halfway to her lips. "Oh my goodness," Margaret Harrison exclaimed, shaking my hand enthusiastically. "Robert, you never told us your daughter was a doctor, and at Cleveland Clinic no less. You must be so incredibly proud." The silence that followed was deafening. I watched my father's face cycle through confusion, embarrassment, and something that might have been panic. My mother set down her champagne glass with shaking hands. "I had no idea you two were related," Mr. Harrison continued, looking between my father and me with growing curiosity. "Robert, you've been working for our company for what, 12 years now? And you never mentioned that your daughter is one of the most promising young cardiologists in the state?" My father opened and closed his mouth several times, but no words came out. The small crowd that had gathered around us was staring with the kind of fascination that people reserve for car accidents and reality television. I could see neighbors whispering to each other, family friends raising their eyebrows, and Tyler looking mortified from across the room. "She's also incredibly modest," I said quietly, finding my voice for the first time all evening. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Aren't you, Dad?" Mr. Harrison beamed at me. "Modest indeed. I heard from Dr. Williams at the clinic that you've been selected for the prestigious cardiothoracic surgery fellowship at Mass General. That's extraordinary, Dr. Chen. Only 3 residents in the entire country receive that opportunity each year." More silence, more staring, more whispered conversations rippling through the crowd. "Mass General," Margaret Harrison repeated, shaking her head in amazement. "Robert, Linda, you must be beside yourselves with pride. I can't imagine having a daughter accomplish something so remarkable and not talking about it constantly." I watched my mother's face crumble as she realized that everyone at their anniversary party was now staring at them, wondering why they had spent the entire evening talking about their unemployed son's business ideas, while completely ignoring their daughter, who was apparently some kind of medical superstar. "We're very proud," my mother finally managed to whisper, but her voice cracked on the words. Mr. Harrison clapped my father on the shoulder. "You raised an exceptional daughter, Robert. The work she's doing is literally saving lives. In fact, I was reading about her latest study on minimally invasive cardiac procedures just last week in the New England Journal of Medicine. Remarkable stuff." I had never seen my father look so small. He was still Robert Chen, the man who had spent 25 years working his way up to assistant manager at the manufacturing plant. But standing next to his daughter, who was apparently publishing research in the New England Journal of Medicine, he looked like he was shrinking before everyone's eyes. The crowd around us had grown larger. People were pulling out their phones, probably Googling my name to see what all the fuss was about. I could hear fragments of conversations. "Had no idea. Never mentioned. Can you imagine not bragging about that?" And then Tyler appeared at my elbow, his face flushed with what I assumed was embarrassment, but might have been something else entirely. "Maya," he said loudly, throwing his arm around my shoulders in a gesture that felt more possessive than affectionate. "There you are, sis. I was just telling everyone about how supportive you've been of my new tech venture." The irony was breathtaking. Now that it was clear I was someone worth knowing, someone worth claiming, suddenly I was part of the family, again. Suddenly I was Tyler's supportive sister and my parents' accomplished daughter. Suddenly I existed, but something had shifted inside me during those 3 hours of invisibility, and Tyler's attempt to redirect the conversation back to himself only crystallized what I was beginning to understand. This wasn't about the party. This wasn't about one night of being overlooked or forgotten. This was about years of being reduced to my usefulness, years of being valued only for what I could provide, years of watching my brother be celebrated for his potential while my actual achievements were treated like embarrassing secrets. "Actually," I said, gently removing Tyler's arm from my shoulders, "I should probably get going. I have an early surgery tomorrow." Mr. Harrison looked disappointed. "Oh, that's too bad. Margaret and I were hoping to hear more about your fellowship. Mass General is where I did my residency, actually, though that was about 40 years ago." "Perhaps another time," I said, shaking both of their hands. "It was lovely to see you both again." I turned to my parents, who were still standing frozen in the midst of their guests, looking like deer caught in headlights. "Thank you for a lovely party," I said quietly. "Happy anniversary." And then I walked away, leaving them to explain to their friends and colleagues why they had spent the entire evening pretending their daughter didn't exist. The drive home gave me time to think, and by the time I reached my apartment, I had made a decision. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea and my laptop, and I began to write. Not a letter, not an email, but a resignation. A resignation from the role I had been playing for the past 8 years. The role of the invisible daughter who funded their dreams, while her own went unacknowledged. I was done being their secret. I was done being their safety net. I was done being introduced as an afterthought only when someone else forced them to remember I existed. Tomorrow, things were going to change. But tonight, for the first time in years, I was going to sleep without the weight of their expectations pressing down on my chest. Because tonight, I had remembered something important. I wasn't just Maya Chen, the daughter who paid their bills and supported their lifestyle. I was Dr. Maya Chen, the cardiologist who was saving lives and conducting groundbreaking research and earning recognition from some of the most respected physicians in the country. And that person deserved better than being hidden in the shadows of her own family's celebration. The next morning brought clarity in ways I hadn't expected. I woke up before my alarm, which was unusual since I typically needed every possible minute of sleep between my hospital shifts. But my mind was already racing, processing everything that had happened at the anniversary party and everything that had led up to that moment of public humiliation. I made coffee and sat at my small kitchen table, looking out at the Cleveland skyline as the sun painted the buildings in soft orange light. My phone had been buzzing intermittently since midnight, but I hadn't looked at it yet. I had a feeling I knew what I would find, and I wanted to organize my thoughts first. When I finally picked up my phone, I wasn't surprised to see 17 missed calls and a dozen text messages. What did surprise me was the range of emotions represented in those messages. My mother's texts started apologetic and quickly escalated to defensive. My father's messages were terse and confused. Tyler's were a mix of anger and what seemed like genuine bewilderment. But it was the voicemail from my mother at 2 a.m. that really captured the essence of what I was dealing with. Her words were slightly slurred, probably from the champagne and wine at the party, but her message was crystal clear in its selfishness. Maya, honey, I don't understand why you had to make such a scene tonight. We were having such a beautiful celebration, and then suddenly everyone was asking us all these questions about why we don't talk about your job more. You know we're proud of you, but it felt like you were trying to upstage our anniversary. People were looking at us like we were bad parents or something. Your father is really upset. Can you please call me in the morning so we can figure out how to handle this? Handle this. As if my existence as a successful doctor was a public relations crisis that needed to be managed. I listened to the voicemail 3 times, and each time I felt something inside me harden a little more. She was worried about how they looked to their friends, not about how they had made me feel. She was concerned about their reputation, not about the years they had spent treating my achievements like inconvenient secrets. The other messages painted a similar picture. Tyler's text at 10:30 a.m. read, "Why did you have to make everything about you tonight? It was supposed to be Mom and Dad's special day, and you turned it into some kind of career showcase. Everyone kept asking me why I didn't know about your fancy job stuff. Thanks for making me look like an idiot." My father's single text was even more revealing. "We need to talk. This situation has gotten out of hand." Situation. That's what I was to them. A situation to be handled, managed, controlled. I spent the morning doing research, something that had become second nature during my medical training. But instead of researching surgical techniques or treatment protocols, I was researching my own family's financial situation. I had been supporting them for so long that I had detailed records of every payment, every contribution, every sacrifice I had made to keep their suburban lifestyle afloat. The numbers were staggering when I laid them all out. Over the past 5 years, I had contributed nearly $40,000 to their household expenses. Monthly mortgage help when my father's hours were cut. Tyler's car insurance payments when his startup wasn't generating revenue. Emergency dental work for my mother when their insurance didn't cover the full cost. The country club membership that allowed them to host their anniversary party. Christmas gifts, birthday celebrations, family vacations where I paid for everyone's flights because I was the only one with available credit. But the financial support was just the tip of the iceberg. I had spent countless hours editing Tyler's job applications, helping him prepare for interviews, networking with my colleagues to find him opportunities. I had researched business plans for his various ventures, connected him with potential investors, and even co-signed a small business loan that he defaulted on within 6 months. For my parents, I had become their personal concierge service. When they needed someone to research insurance options, I spent my few free hours comparing policies and making phone calls. When their computer crashed, I bought them a new one and spent an entire weekend transferring their files and teaching them how to use it. When they wanted to renovate their kitchen, I researched contractors, got quotes, and managed the project timeline because they were too busy to handle it themselves. And through all of this, I had never asked for recognition or praise. I had simply done what I thought good daughters did. I had supported my family because I loved them, and because I believed that's what family meant. But sitting at my kitchen table, looking at years of bank statements and canceled checks and credit card bills, I realized that love wasn't supposed to be one-directional. Love wasn't supposed to be invisible. Love wasn't supposed to make you feel like a secret that needed to be hidden from the world. The pattern became even clearer when I started thinking about family gatherings over the years. Every holiday dinner, where Tyler's latest project dominated the conversation while my medical school achievements were mentioned in passing, if at all. Every family photo where I was positioned slightly behind everyone else, as if I was an afterthought. Every introduction to family friends where I was simply Maya, while Tyler was our son who's starting his own business. I remembered the Christmas when I had been accepted into my residency program at Cleveland Clinic, one of the most prestigious hospitals in the country. I had been so excited to share the news with my family, but when I called home, my mother's first response was to ask if this meant I would still be able to help with Tyler's student loan payments. The conversation lasted less than 10 minutes before she had to go because Tyler needed help with his resume. I remembered my medical school graduation, where my parents spent most of the ceremony talking to other families about Tyler's entrepreneurial potential, while I sat alone after the ceremony, watching other graduates celebrate with families who seemed genuinely excited about their achievements. I remembered countless family dinners where my stories about patients I had helped or procedures I had learned were interrupted by Tyler's need to discuss his latest business idea, or my parents' need to complain about their financial stress. Stress that I was already working overtime to alleviate. The anniversary party hadn't been an anomaly. It had been the culmination of years of systematic erasure. Years of being valued only for what I could provide while being hidden when it came time to celebrate what I had achieved. But what made it even worse was the realization that they weren't embarrassed by my success. They were threatened by it. My achievements highlighted their failures. My independence exposed their dependence. My professional recognition made their treatment of me look exactly like what it was: exploitation. They had spent years positioning Tyler as the family's success story, the one with potential, the one worth investing in. My actual success disrupted that narrative and forced them to confront the fact that they had been betting on the wrong horse while taking the winning horse for granted. The phone rang while I was lost in these thoughts. It was Jordan, my best friend from medical school, who had been at the anniversary party the night before. "Holy shit, Maya," Jordan said without preamble. "I've been thinking about last night. All morning. I can't believe your parents acted like that." "It wasn't really that bad," I started to say, falling back into my old pattern of minimizing and excusing their behavior. "Maya, stop," Jordan interrupted. "I watched them introduce literally every person at that party except you. I watched them talk about Tyler's non-existent business success while completely ignoring the fact that their daughter is about to start one of the most competitive fellowships in the country. And then when that guy Harrison called you doctor and started talking about your research, they looked like they wanted to disappear into the floor." Jordan was right, and hearing it from someone else made it impossible to deny what I had experienced. "The thing that really gets me," Jordan continued, "is that you've been supporting them financially for years, and they treat you like you're some kind of embarrassment. Do you know how many people would kill to have a daughter like you? Do you know how proud my parents are of their kid who's an accountant? And your parents act like being a doctor is something to be ashamed of. They're not ashamed, I said, weakly. They just don't understand my world. Bullshit, Jordan said bluntly. They understand money, don't they? They understand that you've been paying their bills and funding their lifestyle. They understand that your medical degree is what's keeping their house out of foreclosure. They just don't want to admit it, because then they'd have to acknowledge that their golden boy Tyler is a 25-year-old failure who lives in their basement. The words stung because they were true. Tyler had never held a steady job for more than 6 months. His business ventures had all failed within the first year, usually because he lacked the discipline to follow through on his grand plans. But my parents continued to speak about him like he was the next Steve Jobs while treating my actual accomplishments like they were somehow less important than his imaginary potential. I keep thinking about that moment when Harrison introduced you to his wife, Jordan said. The look on your dad's face when he realized that his boss knew more about his daughter's career than he did. The way your mom's hands were shaking when she tried to pretend like she had just forgotten to mention that you're a published researcher. They were humiliated, Maya, but not for the right reasons. What do you mean? They were humiliated because they got caught, not because they realized they had been treating you badly. They were embarrassed about how they looked to other people, not about how they had made you feel. And that tells you everything you need to know about where their priorities are. After I hung up with Jordan, I sat in silence for a long time. The apartment felt different somehow, like the air had changed. I realized that for the first time in years, I was seeing my family clearly, without the filters of obligation and guilt that had obscured my vision for so long. They weren't proud of me. They were threatened by me. They weren't grateful for my support. They were entitled to it. They weren't protecting me by keeping my achievements private. They were protecting themselves from having to acknowledge how much they depended on the daughter they had spent years marginalizing. And Tyler, the brother I had sacrificed so much to support, wasn't grateful for my help. He was resentful of my success. Every opportunity I had created for him, every connection I had made on his behalf, every bill I had paid to keep his credit clean had only increased his animosity toward me because my competence highlighted his incompetence. That afternoon, I did something I had never done before. I made a list of everything I wanted from my family, everything I had been too afraid or too conditioned to ask for over the years. I wanted to be introduced proudly at family gatherings. I wanted my achievements to be celebrated the way Tyler's potential was celebrated. I wanted to be included in family photos as an equal member of the family, not as an afterthought positioned in the background. I wanted my parents to know enough about my work to have a conversation about it, the way they knew every detail of Tyler's various schemes. I wanted to stop being the family ATM, expected to contribute financially while being excluded emotionally. I wanted Tyler to acknowledge the years of support I had provided instead of treating me like a rival for our parents' attention. I wanted my mother to ask about my life, my goals, my challenges, instead of only calling when she needed something. Most of all, I wanted to matter to them the way they mattered to me. But as I wrote these wants down, I realized how naive they were. I was asking people who had spent years demonstrating that they didn't value me to suddenly start valuing me. I was expecting people who had shown me exactly who they were to somehow become different people. The anniversary party had been a gift in a way. It had forced me to see the truth that I had been avoiding for years. My family didn't treat me badly because they didn't know better. They treated me badly because it served their purposes. They kept me invisible because my visibility would have required them to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves. And that realization changed everything. I spent the evening researching apartments in Boston, where I would be starting my fellowship in 3 months. I had been planning to commute back to Cleveland on weekends to continue helping my family. But suddenly that plan seemed absurd. Why would I spend my rare free time traveling 4 hours each way to visit people who couldn't even be bothered to introduce me at their social events? I also started calculating how much money I would save by ending my financial support of my family. The number was shocking. Without their monthly mortgage contribution, Tyler's insurance payments, and the constant stream of emergency expenses, I could actually start building savings for the first time in my adult life. But more than the financial freedom, I was beginning to imagine emotional freedom. Freedom from the constant anxiety about whether I was doing enough for them. Freedom from the guilt that had been programmed into me since childhood. Freedom from the exhausting work of trying to earn love from people who seemed determined not to give it. By the time I went to bed that night, I had made a decision. I wasn't going to respond to their calls and texts right away. I wasn't going to rush to smooth over the awkwardness from the anniversary party. I wasn't going to fix this situation for them the way I had been fixing their situations for years. Instead, I was going to let them sit with the consequences of their choices. Let them explain to their friends why they had hidden their daughter's success. Let them figure out how to pay their bills without my contributions. Let them manage their own problems for once. The phone kept ringing, but for the first time in years, I didn't answer. And with each ignored call, I felt a little bit lighter, a little bit more like myself, because I was beginning to remember who I was before I became their solution to everything. I was Dr. Maya Chen, and that was enough. It had always been enough. 3 days of silence had apparently pushed my family to the breaking point. I knew this because Tyler showed up at my apartment unannounced on Thursday evening, using the key I had given him for emergencies. I came home from a particularly challenging surgery to find him sprawled across my couch, eating leftover Chinese, takeout from my refrigerator and scrolling through his phone like he owned the place. "We need to talk," he said without looking up, as if his presence in my living room was perfectly normal and expected. "Hello to you too," I replied, setting down my medical bag and trying to process the audacity of his unannounced invasion. "I don't remember inviting you over." "Yeah, well, you haven't been answering your phone, so I figured I'd come to you." He finally looked up from his phone, and I could see the irritation in his expression. "Mom's been crying for 3 days. Dad's been pacing around the house like a caged animal, and I'm getting blamed for the whole mess somehow." I walked to my kitchen and poured myself a glass of water, taking my time to respond. The old Maya would have immediately started apologizing, asking what was wrong, offering to fix whatever problem had brought him to my door. But something had shifted in me over the past few days, and I found myself genuinely curious about what he expected from this conversation. "How exactly are you getting blamed for what happened at the anniversary party?" I asked, leaning against my kitchen counter and studying his face. "Because everyone keeps asking about why I didn't know about your fancy doctor stuff," he said, his voice taking on the whiny quality that had annoyed me since we were children. "Like I'm supposed to keep track of every little thing you do at work. Like it's my job to know about your research papers or whatever. Every little thing I do at work. My fellowship at one of the most prestigious hospitals in the country was a little thing. My research that was being published in medical journals was whatever. The career I had built while supporting his every venture was somehow beneath his notice." "Tyler," I said slowly, "did you know that I've been published in the New England Journal of Medicine?" He shrugged. "I guess. You mention work stuff sometimes, but I don't really pay attention to the details." "Did you know that I'm starting a fellowship at Massachusetts General Hospital in 3 months?" Another shrug. "You said something about moving to Boston, I think." "Did you know that only 3 people in the entire country were selected for this fellowship?" For the first time, he looked slightly uncomfortable. "Look, I'm happy for you or whatever, but I don't see why everyone's making such a big deal about it. Lots of people are doctors." I stared at him for a long moment, marveling at his ability to minimize something he couldn't begin to understand. "Tyler, do you know how I paid for medical school?" "Student loans, right?" like everyone else. Student loans and working 3 jobs and tutoring other students and selling my textbooks at the end of every semester to help cover your car insurance payments. His expression shifted slightly, a flicker of something that might have been awareness crossing his features. Do you know how I've been able to afford this apartment while doing my residency? You're a resident at a good hospital. They probably pay you well. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Tyler, residents make about $50,000 a year and work 80-hour weeks. Do you want to know how much I've sent home? To Mom and Dad over the past 5 years to help with the mortgage? He was quiet now, probably sensing that this conversation wasn't going in the direction he had expected. Nearly $40,000, I continued. That's almost a full year's salary that I've contributed to keeping the house you live in. Out of foreclosure. The house where you have your own room and your own bathroom and free meals and free internet while you work on business ideas that never seem to generate any actual income. I didn't ask you to do that, he said defensively. You're right, you didn't ask, but you certainly accepted it. You accepted it when I paid for your health insurance after you aged out of Mom and Dad's plan. You accepted it when I covered your car payments so your credit wouldn't be ruined. You accepted it when I co-signed that business loan that you defaulted on, which damaged my credit score right when I was trying to secure loans for medical equipment. Tyler's face was flushing now, but whether from embarrassment or anger, I couldn't tell. And through all of this, I continued, through years of me supporting this family financially and emotionally, none of you could be bothered to learn enough about my career to have a conversation about it. None of you cared enough to ask about my goals or my challenges or my achievements. But you certainly cared about the checks I was writing. That's not fair, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. What's not fair is that I found out at Mom and Dad's anniversary party that their boss knows more about my career than my own brother does. What's not fair is that I've been treated like a walking ATM while being ignored as a person. What's not fair is that everyone at that party was asking why Mom and Dad never talk about having a daughter who's a doctor, and none of you had an answer. Tyler was quiet for several minutes, staring at his hands. When he finally looked up, his expression was different, more subdued than I had seen him in years. I honestly didn't know, he said quietly. I mean, I knew you were smart and good at your job, but I didn't realize it was such a big deal. Mom and Dad never really talked about it like it was important. And there it was, the truth that I had been circling around for days. My parents had trained Tyler to dismiss my achievements just as effectively as they had trained me to minimize them. He genuinely didn't understand the significance of what I had accomplished because our parents had spent years treating my career like it was background noise to the more important drama of his potential. Tyler, I said, sitting down across from him, I'm going to be a cardiothoracic surgeon. Do you know what that means? He shook his head. It means I operate on people's hearts. I literally hold human hearts in my hands and repair them so that people can live. The fellowship I'm starting in Boston will train me to perform some of the most complex surgical procedures that exist. There are maybe a few hundred people in the world who can do what I'm going to learn to do. I watched his face as he processed this information, seeing perhaps for the first time the magnitude of what his sister had achieved. The research I've been publishing isn't just academic papers. It's developing new techniques that save lives. The study that Harrison mentioned at the party has already been implemented in cardiac care units across the country. People are alive today because of work I did. Tyler was staring at me like he was seeing me for the first time, which in many ways he was. Why didn't anyone ever tell me this? He asked, and for the first time in our conversation, he sounded genuinely confused rather than defensive. Because Mom and Dad were more interested in protecting your feelings than celebrating my achievements, I said. Because acknowledging what I had accomplished would have meant acknowledging what you hadn't accomplished. Because it was easier to pretend that your potential was more important than my reality. The silence stretched between us, heavy with years of miscommunication and misplaced priorities. "So, what happens now?" Tyler asked eventually. "Now I stop pretending that this dynamic is normal or healthy," I said. "Now I stop funding a family that can't be bothered to know who I am. Now I focus on my career and my future instead of constantly trying to fix everyone else's problems." "You're going to cut us off financially?" The question revealed everything about how he saw our relationship. Not, "Are you going to stop talking to us?" or "Can we work this out?" but, "Are you going to cut us off financially?" Because even now, even after everything we had just discussed, his primary concern was the money. "Tyler, I'm going to stop being responsible for problems that aren't mine," I said. "I'm going to stop paying bills for people who treat me like an embarrassment. I'm going to stop supporting a lifestyle that I'm not allowed to be part of." "But what about mom and dad? What about the house? What about them? They're adults. They managed their finances before I started contributing, and they can figure out how to manage them again. But dad's hours got cut, and mom's job doesn't pay enough to cover everything." "Then maybe they need to make some changes. Maybe Tyler needs to get a job that actually pays money instead of pursuing business ventures that exist only in his imagination. Maybe they need to downsize their house or their lifestyle. Maybe they need to face the reality that they've been living beyond their means and using their daughter as a safety net." Tyler looked genuinely panicked at the suggestion that he might need to contribute to the household expenses. "I'm working on something really promising right now. This app idea I have could really take off." "How many app ideas have you had, Tyler? How many business plans have I helped you write? How many networking connections have I made on your behalf? How many times have mom and dad told me that you just need a little more time to find your path?" He didn't answer, but I could see the recognition in his eyes. He was beginning to understand that his family had been enabling his prolonged adolescence while expecting his sister to subsidize it. "I'm 28 years old," I continued. "I've been working since I was 16. I put myself through college and medical school. I've been supporting this family for 5 years while building a career that saves lives. And at mom and dad's anniversary party, I was introduced to exactly 0 people because they were too embarrassed by their successful daughter to acknowledge that I exist." "I don't think they're embarrassed by you," Tyler said weakly. "Then, why didn't they introduce me to anyone? Why do they know every detail of your imaginary businesses but nothing about my actual career? Why did Dad look like he wanted to crawl under a rock when his boss started talking about my research?" Tyler didn't have an answer, because there wasn't a good answer. There was only the truth, and the truth was that our parents had spent years managing their image by highlighting Tyler's potential while hiding my achievements. "What do you want me to tell them?" Tyler asked eventually. "Tell them that if they want a relationship with me, they need to figure out how to value me for who I am, not what I can provide. Tell them that I'm done being their secret. Tell them that I'm done being their solution." After Tyler left, I felt a strange mixture of sadness and relief. Sadness because I had finally acknowledged that my family didn't know me at all, and relief because I had finally stopped pretending that this was normal or acceptable. I spent the evening researching what it would actually cost to cut ties with their financial dependence on me. The mortgage contribution was the biggest expense, but there were dozens of smaller payments that I had been making automatically for so long that I had stopped thinking about them. Tyler's phone bill, my parents' car insurance, the family Netflix account, the Amazon Prime membership that everyone used, the monthly transfer to help with groceries. When I added it all up, I was spending nearly $1,500 a month supporting a family that couldn't introduce me at social events. I opened my laptop and began the process of canceling automatic payments. One by one, I removed myself from their financial obligations. The mortgage contribution, the insurance payments, the phone bills, the subscriptions. Each cancellation felt like removing a weight from my shoulders. But the most important change I made wasn't financial. I changed my emergency contact information at the hospital from my parents to Jordan. I updated my insurance beneficiaries. I removed my parents as authorized users on my credit cards. I changed the passwords on all of my accounts. For the first time in years, my financial life belonged entirely to me. The next morning brought a barrage of phone calls and text messages, but they weren't from my parents. They were from their bank, their insurance company, their credit card companies, all asking about various account changes and payment methods that were no longer working. Apparently, my parents had been using my credit cards and bank accounts for more things than I had realized. The automatic payment for their home security system, the monthly charge for Dad's golf club membership, Mom's subscription to the meal delivery service she had started using when she decided she was too busy to grocery shop. Each failed payment was a small revelation about how deeply embedded I had become in their financial infrastructure. They weren't just relying on my contributions. They had been using my financial resources as if they were their own. My phone rang repeatedly throughout the day, but I was in surgery and couldn't answer. By the time I finished my shift, I had 23 missed calls and a voicemail box full of increasingly frantic messages. Mom's first voicemail was confused. "Maya, honey, something's wrong with our accounts. The bank is saying there's a problem with the mortgage payment. Can you call me when you get this?" Her fifth voicemail was panicked. "Maya, I don't understand what's happening. All of our automatic payments are being declined. The insurance company called and said our policy is going to lapse. Please call me back immediately." Her 10th voicemail was angry. "Maya, Chen, I don't know what game you think you're playing, but this isn't funny. Your father and I need to talk to you right now. This is serious." Dad's voicemails followed a similar progression, from confusion to panic to anger. But it was his final message that really captured the essence of their relationship with me. "Maya, whatever point you think you're making, you've made it. Now fix this mess before it gets out of hand. We can't afford to have our credit ruined because you're having some kind of emotional breakdown." Emotional breakdown. That's what they called my decision to stop subsidizing their lifestyle. That's what they called my refusal to continue being their invisible financial safety net. I didn't call them back that night. Instead, I cooked myself dinner, opened a bottle of wine, and sat on my balcony looking out at the city lights. For the first time in years, I felt truly free. Free from the constant worry about their financial problems. Free from the guilt that had been programmed into me since childhood. Free from the exhausting work of trying to earn love from people who seemed determined not to give it. The next day, I received a text message from my mother that perfectly encapsulated everything that was wrong with our relationship. "Maya, I hope you're satisfied. Your father had to call in sick today because he's so stressed about the financial situation you've created. I haven't slept in 2 days. Tyler is beside himself with worry. You're destroying this family with your selfishness, but I suppose that was your goal all along." I read the message 3 times, marveling at her ability to make herself the victim in a situation where I had been supporting them for years. I was selfish for stopping my financial contributions, but they weren't selfish for accepting them while treating me like I didn't exist. I was destroying the family by refusing to be their ATM, but they weren't destroying anything by refusing to acknowledge my achievements. And then I did something I had never done before. I blocked all of their phone numbers. The silence that followed was profound. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't anticipating the next crisis I would be asked to solve, the next bill I would be asked to pay, the next emergency I would be expected to handle. My phone wasn't buzzing with demands for my time, my money, or my emotional labor. Instead, I could focus on my own life, my own goals, my own future. I spent the weekend apartment hunting in Boston, looking at places I could actually afford now that I wasn't supporting 3 other adults. I researched the fellowship program I would be starting, familiarizing myself with the physicians I would be working with, and the procedures I would be learning. For the first time in years, I felt excited about my future instead of anxious about everyone else's problems. On Monday morning, I received an email from Dr. Williams at Massachusetts General, welcoming me to the fellowship program and asking if I had any questions about relocating to Boston. I wrote back enthusiastically, asking about housing recommendations and research opportunities. His response came within an hour. Dr. Chen, I'm thrilled to have someone of your caliber joining our program. Your research on minimally invasive cardiac procedures has already influenced our protocols here. I think you'll find that Boston offers an environment where talented physicians like yourself can truly flourish. I stared at the email for a long time, trying to remember the last time anyone in my family had expressed that kind of enthusiasm about my career. I couldn't. But Dr. Williams wasn't family, and he valued my work because he understood its importance. He saw my potential because he worked in my field. He was excited about my contributions because he knew what I was capable of achieving. And maybe that was enough. Maybe I didn't need my family's recognition to validate my worth. Maybe I had been looking for approval in all the wrong places. That afternoon, I did something else I had never done before. I called my parents' mortgage company and formally removed myself as a co-signer on their loan. The process was surprisingly simple, though it would likely trigger a review of their ability to maintain the payments without my income as backup. I also called their credit card companies and removed myself as an authorized user and backup payment source. Again, surprisingly simple, though it would probably result in some uncomfortable conversations for my parents about their actual creditworthiness. By the end of the week, I had completely disentangled myself from their financial obligations. My credit report was my own. My bank accounts were my own. My future was my own. And for the first time in years, that future looked bright. 2 weeks after I had blocked my family's phone numbers, the consequences of their financial dependence on me began manifesting in ways that reached far beyond their immediate household. I learned about these developments not from them, but from unexpected sources that painted a vivid picture of how thoroughly their comfortable suburban facade had been built on the foundation of my contributions. The first indication came from Mrs. Patterson, our elderly neighbor who had known my family since we moved to Westlake when I was 12. She called my hospital directly, somehow having tracked down my work number through the Cleveland Clinic directory. The conversation was awkward and illuminating in equal measure. "Dr. Chen," she said, her voice carrying the cautious tone of someone delivering unwelcome news. "I hope you don't mind me calling you at work, but I wasn't sure how else to reach you. I wanted to let you know that there's been quite a bit of activity at your parents' house lately. I was between surgeries, grabbing a quick coffee in the physician's lounge, and her call caught me completely off guard." "What kind of activity, Mrs. Patterson?" "Well, there have been several official-looking vehicles in their driveway over the past week. Bank representatives, I believe, and someone from the insurance company. Your mother mentioned to me over the fence that they're having some temporary financial difficulties, but she seemed quite distressed about it." Mrs. Patterson paused, clearly uncomfortable with the conversation, but feeling compelled to continue. "She also mentioned that you've been too busy with your career to help them right now, and I have to say, dear, that surprised me. You've always been such a devoted daughter." The irony was breathtaking. Even in crisis, my mother was managing to position herself as the victim of my ambition, rather than acknowledging the years of support I had provided. She was telling the neighbors that I was too busy to help, not that I had chosen to stop helping, after years of being treated as an invisible contributor to their lifestyle. "Mrs. Patterson," I said carefully, "I appreciate you calling, but my parents' financial situation is between them and their creditors. I'm sure they'll figure it out." There was a long pause before she responded. "Of course, dear. I just thought you should know. Your parents have always spoken so proudly of Tyler's entrepreneurial spirit, but lately, your mother seems quite worried about practical matters, bills and such." After hanging up, I found myself curious about exactly what was happening at the Eye. house I had helped them keep for 5 years. I wasn't planning to intervene, but I was fascinated by the unraveling process, the way their carefully constructed image was crumbling without my financial scaffolding to support it. That curiosity was satisfied the next day when Jordan called with news that she had gathered through her own network of connections in the Cleveland medical community. "You're not going to believe this," Jordan said without preamble, "but your parents' situation has become quite the topic of conversation among people who know you." "What do you mean?" "Dr. Martinez from cardiology lives in Westlake, about 6 blocks from your parents. He was at the anniversary party, remember? He's been hearing things through the neighborhood grapevine, and he's been asking questions about—" "What happened to you?" Jordan paused for dramatic effect. "Apparently, your parents have been telling people that you've had some kind of mental health crisis and have become estranged from the family due to the stress of your medical career." I nearly choked on my coffee. "They're telling people I've had a mental breakdown? Gets better. They're also telling people that you've selfishly cut off all communication and financial support right when they need you most, and that they're heartbroken by your abandonment of family values." The audacity was stunning. They were rewriting history in real time, transforming themselves from exploitative parents into abandoned victims, and casting me as an unstable daughter who had callously deserted them in their time of need. "But here's the interesting part," Jordan continued. "Dr. Martinez has been doing some asking around about your actual situation. He knows about your fellowship, your research, your publications. He's been telling people that you're one of the most promising young surgeons he's ever worked with. And he's questioning why parents would be complaining about a daughter like that." "What kind of questioning?" "The kind that's making other people curious about what really happened. Dr. Martinez mentioned your situation to Dr. Harrison at a medical society meeting. And Harrison apparently had some very interesting things to say about your parents' behavior at the anniversary party." I felt a chill run through me as I realized that my parents' attempt to control the narrative was backfiring spectacularly. They had assumed they could manage public opinion the same way they had managed family dynamics, but they had miscalculated the reach of the medical community and the respect that my colleagues had for my work. "Jordan, what exactly is Harrison saying?" According to Dr. Martinez, Harrison told the entire cardiology board that he was shocked by your parents' behavior at their anniversary party. He said he's never seen parents so disconnected from their child's achievements, and he's been questioning your father's judgment in other areas as well. The implications hit me immediately. Harrison wasn't just my father's boss. He was a senior executive who had direct influence over my father's career prospects. If Harrison was questioning my father's judgment publicly, it could have serious, professional consequences. "There's more," Jordan said. "Harrison apparently told several people that he's been considering your father for a promotion to senior management, but that he's now concerned about his character and family values. He said that anyone who could treat a daughter like you with such disregard might not be the kind of person he wants in a leadership position." I sat in stunned silence, processing the information. My parents' attempt to hide my achievements and maintain their preferred family narrative wasn't just failing, it was actively damaging my father's career prospects. "Maya," Jordan said gently, "they've been calling you the problem, but everyone who actually knows you is starting to realize that they're the problem." That evening, I received a call from an unknown number. When I answered, I heard my father's voice, but he was calling from someone else's phone. "Maya, we need to talk," he said without preamble. "This situation has gotten completely out of hand." "Hello, Dad," I said calmly. "Whose phone are you using?" "I had to borrow Tyler's friend's phone because you blocked our numbers." His voice was strained, carrying a tension I had rarely heard before. "Maya, I don't know what you think you're accomplishing, but you're destroying everything we've worked for." "What exactly am I destroying?" "My job, for starters." Harrison called me into his office today and asked me some very uncomfortable questions about my family situation. He wanted to know why I never mentioned having a daughter who's a published researcher, and why you seemed so uncomfortable at the anniversary party. I felt a surge of satisfaction that I immediately tried to suppress. This wasn't about revenge. It was about natural consequences finally catching up with choices that my parents had been making for years. What did you tell him? I told him that you've been going through some personal issues and that we're trying to work through them as a family. But Maya, he didn't seem to believe me. He knows too much about your career, and he's asking why I don't seem to know anything about it. Maybe because you don't know anything about it, I said quietly. That's not fair. We've always been proud of you. Have you? Because at your anniversary party, you introduced everyone except me. You talked about Tyler's potential for 3 hours, but couldn't manage to mention that your daughter is a doctor. Harrison had to introduce me to his wife because you couldn't be bothered to acknowledge that I exist. There was a long pause before my father spoke again, and when he did, his voice was different, more vulnerable than I had heard it in years. Maya, I know we made some mistakes at the party. Your mother and I have been talking about it, and we realize that we should have done things differently. But cutting us off completely isn't the answer. We're family. Dad, what's my fellowship? Specialty? What? My fellowship, the one I'm starting in Boston. What's my specialty? Another pause. It's medical. Surgery, I think. Cardiothoracic surgery, Dad. I'm going to be a heart surgeon. I'm going to spend the next 2 years learning to perform some of the most complex surgical procedures that exist. Only 3 people in the country were selected for this fellowship. I know that. Of course I know that. Do you know what journal published my research? Silence. Do you know what my research was about? More silence. Do you know how much money I've contributed to your household over the past 5 years? Maya, this isn't about money. It's not? Because when Tyler came to my apartment, the first thing he asked was whether I was going to cut you off financially. When you called Mrs. Patterson to complain about me, you told her I was too busy to help with your financial difficulties. Every voicemail you left was about fixing the mess with your payments, not about fixing our relationship. I could hear him breathing heavily on the other end of the line. Dad, you're upset about Harrison questioning your judgment, but have you considered that maybe his questions are valid? Maybe a man who doesn't know basic facts about his daughter's career isn't demonstrating the kind of awareness and priorities that make for good leadership. That's not fair, Maya. You know I've been dealing with a lot of stress at work, and I've been dealing with the stress of medical school, residency, research, and financially supporting your family while you've been stressed about work. But somehow I still managed to know everything about Tyler's various business ideas and your golf game and mom's book club activities. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, but it was clear that my father was primarily concerned about the professional consequences of their treatment of me rather than the emotional consequences. He wanted me to call Harrison and explain that we were a close family going through a temporary rough patch. He wanted me to smooth over the awkwardness and restore the image that was now threatening his career advancement. What he didn't want was to acknowledge that their treatment of me had been fundamentally wrong, or to commit to changing the patterns that had led to this crisis. After I hung up, I realized that this conversation had crystallized something important for me. My parents weren't calling because they missed me, or because they had gained insight into their behavior. They were calling because the consequences of their choices were finally affecting them in ways they couldn't ignore or manage. The next few days brought a series of revelations about how thoroughly my withdrawal of support was affecting their lives. Tyler sent me a message through Instagram, apparently forgetting that I could see it was from him despite his attempt to make it seem anonymous. Maya, this is seriously messed up what you're doing. Mom hasn't been sleeping, Dad's talking about having to sell the house, and everyone in the neighborhood is asking questions about why our family is falling apart. I don't understand what we did that was so bad that you had to destroy everything. The message revealed several important things. First, that Tyler still didn't understand the fundamental issues at play and was focused entirely on the consequences, rather than the causes. Second, that my parents were facing serious financial pressure without my contributions. And third, that their attempts to control the narrative in their social circle were failing. I was curious about that last point, so I did something I had never done before. I called Mrs. Patterson back. "Mrs. Patterson, this is Maya Chen. I wanted to thank you for calling me about the situation at my parents' house." "Oh, hello, dear. I hope I didn't overstep by contacting you." "Not at all. I was wondering, though, what exactly my mother told you about our family situation." There was a pause before Mrs. Patterson responded, and I could hear the discomfort in her voice. "Well, she mentioned that you've been under a lot of pressure with your medical career, and that it's been affecting your relationship with the family. She said that you've become quite distant, and that they're worried about you." "Did she mention anything else?" "She did say that you've been unable to help them financially right now because of some personal issues you're working through." She seemed quite upset about it, said that the family has always been so close, and that she doesn't understand what's changed. I found myself smiling at the irony. My mother was telling the neighbors that we had always been a close family while simultaneously explaining why their close daughter was suddenly unable to help them financially. The contradiction was so obvious that I wondered how she expected anyone to believe it. "Mrs. Patterson, can I ask you something? In all the years you've known my family, how often have my parents mentioned my career achievements?" Another pause, longer this time. "Well, now that you mention it, they always talked about Tyler's potential and his various business ideas. Your mother was quite excited about his entrepreneurial spirit, but they didn't talk much about your work. No, I always assumed it was. Because medical professionals prefer to keep their work private. And at neighborhood gatherings, how often was I included in family discussions?" "Actually, dear, I'm not sure I can recall many occasions when you were present for neighborhood events. Your parents would attend holiday parties and summer barbecues, usually with Tyler, but I don't think I've seen you at many social functions over the years." The picture was becoming clearer. My parents had been systematically excluding me from their social life while using my financial contributions to fund that social life. They had presented themselves to their community as the parents of one child, the promising entrepreneur Tyler, while keeping their successful daughter hidden from view. But now that the financial foundation was cracking, the social foundation was cracking too. Neighbors were asking questions, colleagues were making observations, and my parents were discovering that their carefully constructed image was more fragile than they had realized. That weekend, I received an unexpected visitor. Jordan knocked on my door Saturday morning with coffee and pastries from our favorite bakery. "I come bearing gifts and gossip," she announced, settling onto my couch. "You're going to want to hear this. More neighborhood drama? Better. Hospital drama. Dr. Harrison apparently had lunch with Dr. Williams from Mass General yesterday." I felt my stomach tighten. What were they discussing? "You, actually. Harrison wanted to know more about the fellowship you're starting, and he asked Williams about your qualifications and potential." "And?" "Williams apparently spent an hour detailing your research, your surgical skills, your publications, and your potential to become one of the leading cardiothoracic surgeons of your generation." Jordan paused to sip her coffee, clearly enjoying the suspense. "Harrison then mentioned that he was surprised by how disconnected your family seemed from your achievements, and Williams told him that family dynamics often don't reflect professional excellence. But here's the interesting part. Williams asked Harrison about your family situation because he's been considering offering you additional research opportunities that would require family support during your fellowship." "What kind of research opportunities?" "The kind that come with substantial grants and international recognition. The kind that would establish you as a leading researcher in your field before you even finish your fellowship." But Williams wanted to make sure you had a strong support system because the work would be demanding. I felt a chill as I realized the implications. My parents' behavior wasn't just affecting their own social standing, it was potentially affecting my professional opportunities. What did Harrison tell him? That's where it gets interesting. Harrison told Williams that based on his observations, your family situation might actually be a source of stress rather than support, and that you might be better off focusing entirely on your career without the distraction of family drama. Harrison said that? According to my source, Harrison told Williams that anyone strong enough to achieve what you've achieved while dealing with an unsupportive family would probably thrive in a demanding research environment. I sat back, trying to process this information. My father was worried about Harrison's opinion affecting his career prospects, but Harrison was apparently more impressed by my resilience than concerned about my family's dysfunction. There's more, Jordan continued. Williams is planning to recommend you for the International Research Fellowship, and Harrison offered to provide a reference letter based on his observations of your character and professionalism. The irony was perfect. My parents' attempt to hide my achievements had backfired so completely that their behavior was now being used as evidence of my strength and independence. That afternoon, I made a decision that felt both terrifying and liberating. I was going to stop hiding from my family's dysfunction and start embracing my independence completely. I was going to accept every opportunity that came my way, pursue every research project that interested me, and build the career I had always dreamed of without worrying about how it affected people who had never supported it anyway. I called Dr. Williams and told him that I was very interested in the additional research opportunities he had mentioned. I told him that my family situation was complicated, but that it wouldn't interfere with my professional commitments. His response was immediate and enthusiastic. Dr. Chen, I think you'll find that the most successful physicians often come from challenging family backgrounds. The resilience and independence you've developed will serve you well in this field. By Sunday evening, I had made another decision. I was going to unblock my family's phone numbers, not because I wanted to reconcile, but because I wanted to control the terms of any future communication. I wanted them to understand that their attempts to manipulate the narrative had failed, and that their consequences were entirely of their own making. When I unblocked their numbers, my phone immediately started buzzing with accumulated text messages and voicemails that had been trying to reach me for days. Reading through them was like watching a real-time breakdown of their psychological state as the reality of their situation became undeniable. But I wasn't ready to respond yet. First, I wanted to prepare for the conversation I knew was coming. The conversation where they would try one last time to convince me that their problems were my responsibility to solve. I spent the evening writing notes about everything I wanted, to say everything I needed them to understand, and everything I was willing to accept going forward. Because this time, I was going to set the terms of the relationship instead of accepting theirs. This time, I was going to be the one with the power. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning while I was reviewing surgical notes for my afternoon procedure. My mother's number appeared on the screen, and after 3 weeks of silence, I decided it was time to have the conversation that would determine the future of our relationship. When I answered, her voice was smaller than I had ever heard it. "Maya, please don't hang up," she said immediately, as if she expected me to end the call before she could speak. "We need to talk. All of us, as a family." "What would you like to talk about, Mom?" "Everything," she said, and I could hear tears in her voice. "Maya, we've made terrible mistakes and we need to fix this before it's too late." The phrase, "before it's too late," struck me as interesting. Too late for what? Too late to repair our relationship? Or too late to prevent the complete collapse of their social and financial stability? "What kind of mistakes?" I asked, genuinely, curious about how she would frame the situation. "We should have celebrated you more. We should have talked about your achievements. We should have introduced you properly at the anniversary party. We know that now, and we're sorry." It was a start, but it felt like someone apologizing for spilling coffee when they had actually burned down the house. The anniversary party wasn't the problem. It was simply the moment when the problem became visible to people outside our family. Mom, when did you realize that my career was worth celebrating? We always knew you were doing important work, honey. We just didn't understand how to talk about it. Medical terminology is so complicated, and we didn't want to get the details wrong when we talked to other people. I felt the familiar frustration rising in my chest. Even now, even in what was supposed to be an apology, she was making excuses. That revealed how little effort they had put into understanding my life. Mom, for 5 years, you've called me when you needed money, when you needed help with paperwork, when you needed someone to research insurance options, or help Tyler with his business plans. During those conversations, did I ever use medical terminology that was too complicated for you to understand? Well, no, but... And when I told you about my research or my surgical training or my fellowship acceptance, did I use language that was beyond your comprehension? She was quiet for a moment. No, Maya, you always explained things in ways we could understand. So the problem wasn't that my career was too complicated to discuss. The problem was that you chose not to discuss it. I could hear her crying softly on the other end of the line, but I wasn't ready to offer comfort yet. This conversation needed to happen without the emotional manipulation that had characterized our relationship for years. Your father wants to talk to you too, she said eventually. And Tyler, we all want to make this right. What does making it right look like to you? We want you to come home for dinner. We want to sit down as a family and work through this. We want to find a way to move forward together. And then what? I start sending money again, and you go back to treating my career like a secret hobby? No, Maya, things will be different. We promise. Promises. The same word they had used when I co-signed their mortgage refinancing, when I agreed to help Tyler with his business loan, when I started making monthly contributions to their household expenses. Promises that had been broken so consistently that they had lost all meaning. Mom, I'm going to ask you some questions and I want you to answer honestly. Can you do that? Of course. How much money have I contributed to your household over the past 5 years? I don't know the exact amount, but we're grateful for everything you've done. Take a guess. Maybe $10,000? $40,000, Mom. Almost a full year of my resident salary. How much do you think Tyler has contributed to the household during that same period? Silence. How many times have you called me for financial help versus how many times you've called just to see how I'm doing? More silence. At the anniversary party, how many people did you introduce Tyler to? And how many people did you introduce me to? Maya, we know we made mistakes. I'm not asking for an apology right now. I'm asking if you understand what the mistakes actually were. She was crying harder now, but she managed to speak. We took you for granted. We treated you like you would always be there to fix our problems, and we didn't give you the recognition you deserved. It wasn't a complete understanding, but it was closer to the truth than anything I had heard from them before. Mom, I'm willing to have a family meeting, but it's going to be on my terms. I'm going to say everything I need to say, and you're going to listen without interrupting, defending, or making excuses. After I'm finished, you can respond. Can you agree to that? Yes, she said immediately. Yes, we can do that. And I want you to understand that this conversation isn't about me coming back to the way things were. This is about determining whether we can have a relationship going forward and what that relationship might look like. 3 days later, I drove to my childhood home for the first time in over a month. The house looked the same from the outside, but as I walked up the front steps, I felt like a different person than the one who had left after the anniversary party. I had clarity now and confidence, and most importantly, I had options. My family was waiting for me in the living room, arranged on the couch and chairs like defendants awaiting sentencing. Tyler looked uncomfortable and kept checking his phone. My father looked older than I remembered, with new lines around his eyes and a tension in his shoulders that spoke of stress and sleepless nights. My mother looked fragile, almost brittle, as if she might shatter if I spoke too loudly. I sat down across from them and took a deep breath. "I want to start by telling you what the past month has been like for me," I said. "I want you to understand what it feels like to finally stop carrying the weight of everyone else's problems and focus on my own life for the first time in years." I told them about the research opportunities that were opening up for me, about the fellowship that would establish my career, about the recognition I was receiving from colleagues who understood the value of my work. I told them about the apartment I was planning to rent in Boston, about the financial freedom I was experiencing for the first time in my adult life, about the relief of not constantly worrying about their next crisis. "I want you to understand that I'm not withholding support to punish you," I said. "I'm redirecting my energy toward my own goals because I finally realized that's what healthy adults do. They invest in their own futures instead of constantly subsidizing other people's choices." Tyler shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Maya, we get it. You're successful and we should have recognized that more. But cutting us off completely seems extreme." "Tyler, what do you think my fellowship involves?" He looked confused by the question. "Surgery stuff?" "I'm going to spend 2 years learning to perform heart transplants, Tyler. I'm going to learn to take a dying heart out of someone's chest and replace it with a healthy heart. And that person will live because of my skill and knowledge. There are maybe 100 people in the world who can do what I'm going to learn to do." I watched his face as he processed this information, seeing perhaps for the first time the magnitude of what his sister had achieved. "The research I've been publishing isn't just academic work. It's developing new surgical techniques that are saving lives right now, today, in hospitals around the world. Children are growing up with healthy hearts because of procedures I helped design." My father cleared his throat. "Maya, we're proud of you. We've always been proud. Dad, what's the name of the fellowship program I'm entering?" Silence. "What hospital am I going to?" "Boston," he said uncertainly. "Massachusetts General Hospital, Dad. One of the most prestigious medical institutions in the world. What's the name of the journal that published my research?" More silence. "New England Journal of Medicine, the most respected medical journal in existence. Harrison knew these details about my career because he bothered to learn them. My own father doesn't know them because he never bothered to ask." I could see my father shrinking into his chair, but I wasn't finished. "For 5 years, I've listened to detailed reports about Tyler's business ideas, even though none of them have ever generated a single dollar of revenue. I've heard about his app concepts, his marketing strategies, his networking events, his investor meetings. I could probably write a business plan for any of his ventures from memory." I turned to Tyler. "But you didn't know that I was published in medical journals. You didn't know that my fellowship is competitive or prestigious. You didn't even know what kind of surgery I'm training to perform. That's not because medical careers are more complicated than business ventures. It's because this family chose to pay attention to your imaginary potential while ignoring my actual achievements." Tyler looked like he wanted to argue, but he seemed to realize that anything he said would only prove my point. "I want you to understand something else," I continued. "The reason I'm successful isn't despite this family dynamic, but because of my response to it. I learned to be self-reliant because I couldn't rely on you. I learned to be financially responsible because I had to manage not only my own expenses, but yours as well. I learned to be emotionally independent because I couldn't count on emotional support from home." My mother was crying again, but I could see that she was really listening this time. "The irony is that you created exactly the kind of daughter you should have been proud of, but you were so invested in Tyler's potential that you missed the reality of what I was becoming." I paused to let that sink in before continuing. "Now, I want you to understand what the future looks like. I'm moving to Boston in 6 weeks to start a fellowship that will determine the trajectory of my entire career. I'm going to be working with some of the most brilliant surgeons in the world, and I'm going to be developing skills that will allow me to save lives in ways that most people can only imagine. I looked at each of them in turn. I'm also going to be building a life that belongs entirely to me. I'm going to make friends who value my work, date people who appreciate my ambition, and create a social circle that knows who I am and what I've accomplished. I'm going to attend medical conferences and research symposiums and professional gatherings where my achievements are recognized and celebrated. The weight of what I was saying was settling over them like a heavy blanket. The question for all of you is whether you want to be part of that life or continue to be strangers to it. But if you want to be part of it, things have to change fundamentally. I pulled out a piece of paper I had prepared before coming over. These are my conditions for maintaining a relationship with this family. First, I will never again provide financial support for lifestyle choices that you can't afford on your own. If you want to keep this house, you need to figure out how to pay for it without my contributions. If Tyler wants to pursue business ventures, he needs to find his own funding. Tyler started to object, but I held up my hand. Second, I expect to be treated as an equal member of this family, not as a resource to be exploited. That means being included in social events, being introduced proudly to your friends, having my career discussed with the same enthusiasm that you've shown for Tyler's potential. I looked directly at my father. Third, I expect you to educate yourselves about my work the same way I've educated myself about yours. I want you to be able to have conversations about my research, my surgical training, my fellowship goals. I want you to know enough about my career to represent it accurately when people ask about me. I turned to Tyler. Fourth, I expect reciprocity in our relationship. I've spent years helping you with business plans, job applications, and networking. If we're going to have a relationship going forward, I want to see evidence that you're interested in my goals and challenges, not just your own. Finally, I looked at my mother. And fifth, I expect honesty about what happened and why. I don't want to hear any more explanations about how my career was too complicated to understand or how you forgot to mention my achievements. I want acknowledgement that you made deliberate choices about how to treat me, and I want commitment to making different choices going forward. The room was completely silent when I finished. I could see them processing the conditions, understanding, perhaps for the first time, that I was offering them a choice rather than an ultimatum. If you can't accept these conditions, then we need to acknowledge that our relationship has run its course. I'll send birthday cards and holiday greetings, but we won't pretend to be a close family when we're actually strangers who share DNA. My father was the first to speak, and his voice was rough with emotion. Maya, I need to tell you something, and it's going to be hard to hear. He paused, seeming to gather courage. When Harrison called me into his office to ask about you, I realized that I knew more about my golf buddy's children than I knew about my own daughter. I could tell him about Joe's son, who's a teacher, and Mike's daughter, who's a nurse, but I couldn't tell him basic facts about your career. He looked down at his hands. I've been thinking about that every day since then. How did I become the kind of father who doesn't know what his daughter does for work? How did I become the kind of man who hides his daughter's success instead of celebrating it? My mother wiped her eyes and spoke up. Maya, I need to tell you something too. After the anniversary party, Mrs. Patterson asked me why we never talk about having a doctor in the family. And I realized that I've been telling people about Tyler's business ideas for years, but I've never once mentioned that my daughter saves lives for a living. She took a shaky breath. I think I was afraid that talking about your success would make Tyler feel bad about himself. But that wasn't protecting Tyler. That was hurting you. And it was hurting Tyler too, because it taught him that he didn't need to actually achieve anything as long as we kept talking about his potential. Tyler looked up at this, his face flushing with embarrassment or anger. I couldn't tell which. I also need to tell you, my mother continued, that we've been living beyond our means for years, And we've been using your contributions to maintain a lifestyle we can't actually afford. Without your help, we're going to have to make some serious changes." "What kind of changes?" my father answered. "We're going to have to sell the house. Even with Tyler getting a job, we can't afford the mortgage payments without your contributions. We're looking at smaller places, apartments maybe." I felt a surge of something that might have been sadness, but was probably just nostalgia for the idea of a family home that had never really been my home anyway. "We're also going to have some difficult conversations with Tyler about his future," my mother added, glancing at my brother. Tyler finally looked up from his phone. "I've been thinking about what you said, Maya. About how you always knew details about my business ideas, but I didn't know anything about your work. And I realized that you were right. I was so focused on my own stuff that I never bothered to learn about yours." He paused, seeming to struggle with the words. "I also realized that I've been treating you like you owed me support instead of being grateful for it. When you stopped helping, my first thought wasn't about how hard you'd been working to support all of us. It was about how your decision was going to affect me." This was the first acknowledgement I had ever heard from Tyler that he understood the dynamic that had been operating in our family. "I've been looking for a real job," he continued. "Not another startup idea, but an actual job with a paycheck. I started a marketing firm next week." I stared at him, genuinely surprised. "You got a job?" "Yeah. Turns out that when you actually need money, you find ways to make it happen." My father cleared his throat again. "Maya, I want you to know that I called Harrison and told him about your fellowship. I told him about your research and your achievements, and I told him how proud I am of you." "How did that conversation go?" "He said he was glad to hear that I was finally catching up with my daughter's success. He also said that your character and independence had impressed him, and that he thought you were going to have an extraordinary career." My father paused, looking directly at me for the first time during the conversation. He also offered to write you a recommendation letter for any future opportunities, based on his observations of your professionalism and resilience. He said that anyone who could achieve what you've achieved while dealing with an unsupportive family environment was clearly someone special. I felt a mix of emotions at this news: pride that my professional network was expanding, sadness that it had taken a crisis for my father to learn basic facts about my career, and relief that the damage to his relationship with his boss wasn't irreversible. "I also want you to know," my father continued, "that I've been reading about your research. I found your published papers online, and I've been trying to understand what you're working on." "And what did you find?" "That my daughter is developing surgical techniques that are saving children's lives, and that I should have been shouting about it from the rooftops instead of hiding it like it was something to be ashamed of." I felt tears starting to form in my eyes, but I wasn't ready to let emotion overwhelm the practical aspects of this conversation. "I appreciate all of that," I said carefully, "but I need you to understand that words aren't enough anymore. I need to see consistent changes in how you treat me and how you talk about me." "What would that look like?" my mother asked. "It would look like phone calls that aren't about crises you need me to solve. It would look like family gatherings where my career is discussed as enthusiastically as Tyler's job. It would look like you being able to tell your friends basic facts about my work without having to research it first." I looked around the room at all of them. "Most importantly, it would look like you valuing my time and emotional energy the same way you value my financial contributions. I don't want to be the person you call only when you need something fixed." "We can do that," my mother said immediately. "Can you?" "Because it's going to require you to see me differently than you've seen me for years. It's going to require you to think of me as a person with my own goals and challenges, not just as a solution to your problems." "We want to try," my father said. "We want to learn how to be the family you deserve." I sat back in my chair, feeling a strange mixture of hope and wariness. They were saying the right words, but I had heard promises from them before. The difference this time was that I wasn't dependent on their approval or support. I had options now, and they knew it. "Here's what I'm willing to do," I said finally. "I'm willing to have regular contact with you while I'm in Boston, but it's going to be on equal terms. I'll call you to share news about my fellowship, and I expect you to call me to share news about your lives. I'll visit when I can, but I won't be coming home every weekend to solve problems or provide emergency support." I paused to make sure they were understanding the implications. "I'm also willing to help you learn about my work, but you have to do the effort of asking questions and remembering the answers. I'm not going to keep explaining the same basic concepts every time we talk." "And financially?" Tyler asked quietly. "Financially, you're on your own, all of you. I'll contribute to group gifts for birthdays and holidays, but I won't be paying anyone's bills or covering anyone's emergencies. You're all adults, and it's time for you to handle adult responsibilities, without relying on your daughter and sister as a safety net." The finality of this statement seemed to hit them all at once. Tyler looked scared, my parents looked worried, but I also saw something that might have been relief in their expressions. Maybe they were tired of being dependent on me, even if they hadn't been willing to admit it. "There's something else I want you to understand," I said. "I'm going to be building a new life in Boston, and I'm going to be selective about who I include in that life. I'm going to choose friends who celebrate my achievements, colleagues who challenge me to be better, and eventually a partner who values my ambition and supports my goals." I looked at each of them again. If you want to be part of that life, you need to earn your place in it. I'm not going to include you just because we're related. I'm going to include you because you add value to my life instead of just taking from it. The conversation continued for another 2 hours, covering practical details about my move to Boston, their plans for downsizing their living situation, and Tyler's new job. But the most important part was the shift in dynamic that I could feel happening in real time. For the first time in years, I was speaking to them as an equal, rather than as a subordinate. When I finally left their house that evening, I felt emotionally drained, but also oddly hopeful. They had heard me, really, heard me, in ways that they had never been able to before. Whether they would follow through on their commitments remained to be seen, but at least now we all understood what the expectations were. 6 weeks later, I moved to Boston to start my fellowship at Massachusetts General Hospital. The transition was everything I had hoped it would be and more. My colleagues treated me with respect and enthusiasm. My research opportunities exceeded my expectations, and my social life flourished in ways it never had in Cleveland. For the first time in my adult life, I was surrounded by people who knew my worth and celebrated my achievements. I was invited to dinner parties where my work was discussed with genuine interest, professional conferences where my research was recognized and cited, and social gatherings where I was introduced as Dr. Maya Chen, the promising young cardiothoracic surgeon, rather than as someone's sister or daughter. My family kept their promises mostly. My mother called me every Sunday, not to ask for help with problems, but to hear about my week and share news about hers. My father sent me articles about cardiac surgery that he found interesting, along with questions about my research that showed he was making an effort to understand my work. Tyler got a promotion at his marketing job and called to tell me about it himself, asking for advice about his career trajectory instead of just assuming I would solve his problems for him. They sold the house in Westlake and moved to a smaller place that they could afford on their own. My mother got a part-time job at a medical office, partly because they needed the income, but also because she wanted to learn more about healthcare so she could understand my work better. Tyler moved out of their house and into his own apartment, taking responsibility for his own expenses for the first time in his adult life. The changes weren't perfect or immediate, but they were real and sustained. When I visited them for Thanksgiving, Tyler introduced me to his girlfriend as his sister, the heart surgeon, and he knew enough about my fellowship to answer her questions about my work. My parents had framed my medical degree and hung it in their living room next to Tyler's college diploma. My mother had joined a book club that was reading a memoir about women in medicine, and she asked thoughtful questions about my experiences as a female surgeon. Most importantly, I felt like myself around them for the first time in years. I wasn't performing the role of the responsible daughter or the family problem solver. I was just Maya, sharing my life with people who finally knew who I was and valued what I had accomplished. 8 months into my fellowship, I received an email that changed everything. Dr. Williams informed me that I had been selected for the International Research Fellowship that Harrison had recommended me for, a 2-year program that would allow me to work with cardiac surgeons in London, Tokyo, and Sydney while developing new minimally invasive surgical techniques. When I called my family to share the news, their reaction was everything I had hoped for but never experienced before. My mother screamed with excitement. My father asked detailed questions about the research I would be conducting and the hospitals I would be working in. Tyler immediately started researching the cities I would be living in and sending me articles about expat communities and cultural opportunities. For the first time in my life, my family was celebrating my achievement with the same enthusiasm they had once reserved for Tyler's potential. They were proud of me, and they wanted everyone to know it. The girl who had stood invisible at her parents' anniversary party, watching them introduce everyone except her, was gone. In her place was Dr. Maya Chen, whose achievements were too significant to hide, whose worth was too obvious to deny, and whose future was too bright to diminish. I had learned something that took me nearly 3 decades to understand. You can't force people to value you, but you can stop accepting treatment that suggests you have no value. You can't make people celebrate your achievements, but you can. Build a life where your achievements are recognized and honored by people who matter. Most importantly, you can't change people who are determined not to see you, but you can change your own life so dramatically that they have no choice but to notice who you've become. My name is Dr. Maya Chen, and I am no longer anyone's secret. I am no longer anyone's backup plan. I am no longer anyone's invisible daughter. I am exactly who I was always meant to be, and that is more than enough. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.